Thanks for staying with us on SABC News. Let's get some analysis on this now. Mandla Isaacs from Zehuti Advisory joins me. Thanks so much for your time on SABC News this afternoon. So your broad thoughts on that reshuffle?
Well, if we were to establish a juxtaposition between political motivations for appointments on one hand and competence or people being fit for purpose on the other hand, it feels 80 or 90% political. I will say on the positive side, President Ramaphosa can no longer hide behind this idea that his cabinet was a unity cabinet that had to appease the RET faction. This is now his cabinet. He's put in his loyalists in place in key positions in the presidency, in the finance ministry, and in the security cluster. So it's now time for his administration to deliver on the priorities of South Africans.
Mm-hmm. So what would those priorities be? And talk to us more about those political appointments.
Well, clearly we all understand the challenges at this point. We need to get this economy growing inclusively. We've seen, certainly over the past month, the instability that has resulted from that, and law and order in particular. So those are some of the things that you'd like to see us really try to make proper progress on. Mm-hmm. Politically, really there are some people that, clearly he's got Mr. Gungubele coming in place of the late Jackson Mthembu as a close confidant and lieutenant in the presidency. Enoch Godongwana as well as another. Both of those gentlemen were, key supporters of his at NASREC. And so he's clearly brought them into quite important and influential roles. So he's appointed kind of people that he trusts, as well as Minister Nchaveni, I believe, as the new Minister of Communications. That's a key policy area with the spectrum allocation just kind of hanging for years on end. He clearly approves of her performance in an acting role. So he's appointed a lot of loyal people, as well as even Azizi Modu as well. And then, of course, Mr. Ile hanging on at the police ministry.
So the rant down on that announcement of Tito Mboweni having left President Cyril Ramaphosa, saying Tito Mboweni's been asking to leave. Talk us through that and what's happening now. Why did the market react like that to Mboweni going?
Well, you generally don't see finance ministry transitions happen so abruptly in this way. There were very few signals that a change was coming. Normally, in the best of times, presidents try to signal that a change is imminent. This kind of came out of nowhere. Mr. Godongwana had not been in government, although he had been the chair at DBSA. He's a longtime economic policy lead at the ANC. So there are some in the business community who will know him and may even trust him. But, in terms of the markets more broadly, this might be seen a little bit as someone who's, quite a political, kind of a very party political person coming directly from the Tuli House. I think he has a reputation as a pragmatist. But I think if there was a bit of a wobble, I think the markets will remember that, at some point a few years back, he floated the idea of prescribed assets. And I think that's something that went down as a lead balloon in the investment community. So that may have something to do with it, as well as some of the kind of cloudy question marks in his past.
All right. So there was the sense that Mboweni was a very steady hand, prudent about fiscal consolidation and debt, and more experienced than, say, Des van Rooyen, Pravin Gordhan and Malusi Gigaba, who preceded him. But now there's also concern about Enoch Godongwana, who resigned as deputy minister almost a decade ago, over that pension fund scandal. Where are we going?
He's a known quantity, right? So he's not someone that we can say we don't know what he thinks. He's overseen ANC economic policy for some time now. He's been responsible for, he would be the last person to sign off on their economic policy documents at various conferences, the paper they put out last year. Unfortunately, all that thinking is very pedestrian. I can tell you right now, there's nothing that has come out of the ANC's economic policy unit over the last decade that is going to get us where we need to go as a country. But he's a known quantity. I will say, Minister Mboweni, has been accused of being somewhat aloof and somewhat disengaged, and in terms of his overseeing of National Treasury, speaking to people close to the department. He's kind of back at the farm, tweeting about recipes. He's not necessarily deeply engaged in the work of his officials and making timely decisions. So to some extent, a more hands-on minister that wants to be there, that is in tune with the economic policy consensus inside the senior leadership of the ANC, may be an improvement just from a delivery, getting things done, and just being applied to the job. Besides, for how long do you want to have somebody in such a key role who doesn't want the job?
Mm-hmm. Also, when those announcements were made last night, concern coming out about the State Security Agency online chatter saying this is the beginning of the descent into dictatorship, for the State Security Agency falling under the presidency, and also concerns about the people who are in there. Talk to us more about that.
Well, that's a tricky one. I mean, I think President Ramaphosa he's got a bit of a pass in being able to lay last month's fiasco on outgoing Minister Tlolo, at least outgoing of that post, because clearly he didn't implement the recommendations of his incoming National Security Advisor, Mr. Mufamadi, 3 years ago. But in any case, I think people have a bit of PTSD over how our last president abused, and some of his ministers abused the intelligence portfolio. But the Constitution does say that intelligence is the president's responsibility, that he is the key political accountability there, and that to the extent that he wants to delegate it to another minister, that's a choice that he can make. But there's certainly nothing untoward about him locating intelligence in the presidency. And frankly, I think it's a welcome development at this juncture, given how spotty that portfolio has been, how important it is to our country and our well-being. I think it's a good thing that the president wants to bring it a bit closer to him, put people he trusts in charge of it, and make sure that portfolio is run effectively. All
right. What do you make of the view that there's a constant recycling of ministers, some whose performance can be described at best as mediocre, and that there's a conflation of youth and capability when it comes to new ministers or moving around that's not really bearing results?
It's completely valid. President Ramaphosa benefited from a kind of a sleight of hand. Almost, for some reason, we in South Africa allowed ourselves to believe that President Zuma ran the country into the ground alone over the past decade, as if he didn't have a cabinet full of 60 senior politicians and an NEC of 80 politicians exercising collective leadership along with him. It's the ANC who ran the country into the ground. The same people who ran the country during the 9 wasted years President Ramaphosa talked about are in the cabinet now. So there's no question that there's a lot of incompetence that remains. We have horrendous education performance. No one talks about whether Minister Mochecha should continue. Our SOEs continue to be in intensive care. Pravin Gordon, it's unclear what he's doing other than experimenting with starting airlines. So, I mean, it's exactly right. Competence, as I said, is the least important consideration, unfortunately, in the ANC political calculus over how to stock a cabinet. And we continue to suffer drift and dysfunction as a result.
Mandla Isaacs from Zehuti Advisory, thanks so much for your insight this afternoon and your time on SABC News.
Thank you.